More than 50,000 years ago, human beings were already reaching landscapes cut apart by rivers, lakes, marshes, and stretches of sea, yet nobody has left you an instruction manual explaining the moment when someone first thinks, perhaps with understandable hesitation, that water might become a road instead of a wall. You stand on a muddy bank in deep prehistory. The ground beneath your feet is cool and soft, pressed with footprints from people, deer, and animals you cannot quite identify. In front of you, a broad river slides past, brown beneath the morning light. You can hear insects in the reeds, the splash of something large beneath the surface, and the distant calls of birds feeding along the opposite shore. That shore is close enough to see, close enough to want, and completely unreachable unless you solve a problem that nature has apparently designed with very little concern for your travel plans. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you settle in, tell me where in the world you're listening from, and what the local time is where you are. Now, dim the lights and return to that riverbank, where one of humanity's oldest technological problems waits quietly in front of you. You have no boat, there is no dock, no rope neatly coiled beside you, no helpful sign explaining ferry times. There is only moving water. To understand why boats eventually appear, you first have to understand just how inconvenient water can be when you cannot cross it safely. On land, your world is already complicated enough. You move through forests where roots catch your feet, across grasslands where predators may notice you before you notice them, and over hills where every useful object somehow becomes heavier on the climb. Yet land has one enormous advantage. You can usually keep going. A river says no, not politely either. A wide river can divide hunting grounds, separate families, trap people during seasonal floods, and prevent access to plants, stone, animals, or shelter visible on the opposite bank. Even a narrow channel can be dangerous if the current is strong. Swimming is possible, of course. Humans can swim, and there is no reason to imagine prehistoric people as helpless near water. Communities living beside rivers and coast probably become extremely familiar with shallows, tides, currents, and seasonal changes. But swimming has limits. You cannot comfortably swim across powerful water while carrying a child, a basket of gathered food, several stone tools, a bundle of dry tinder, and perhaps an irritated relative who has decided this crossing was your idea. Cold water drains strength quickly. Currents pull you sideways. Deep channels conceal rocks and animals. A crossing that looks simple from shore becomes very different once your feet lose contact with the bottom, and so water begins to shape your decisions. You follow rivers instead of crossing them. You camp on one side rather than the other. You wait for dry seasons when channels shrink. You search for fallen trees, exposed stones, sandbanks, or shallow places where the river loosens its grip. This is not yet boat building. It is something more basic and perhaps more important. It is frustration. Technology often begins there, not with a sudden flash of genius beneath a dramatic prehistoric sunset, but with somebody becoming thoroughly tired of doing something the difficult way. Imagine your group following a herd across open country. The animals reach a river and enter without consulting anyone. Some swim, others find a shallow crossing. You arrive carrying tools and food, only to watch dinner continue calmly toward the horizon. The water has just interfered with hunting, or perhaps the problem is not hunting at all, as across the river you can see trees bearing useful fruit. Beyond them lies exposed stones suitable for making sharp tools. Maybe another group lives there, people with whom you exchange materials, partners, knowledge, stories, or occasionally complaints. Water separates resources as efficiently as any wall. Archaeological records confirm that prehistoric humans repeatedly settled near rivers, lakes, wetlands, and coastlines. This makes perfect sense. Water provides drinking supplies, fish, shellfish, birds, edible plants, animal traffic, and fertile gathering areas. It also creates a lovely contradiction. The very place that gives you food can stop you from reaching more food. You crouch near the bank and listen. Water moves with a continuous low sound, folding around stones and reeds. The scent is a mixture of wet soil, crushed vegetation, and perhaps smoke drifting from your camp. A cold breeze comes across the surface and touches your skin. You know this place intimately. You know where fish gather. You know when birds arrive. You know which muddy edges are safe and which swallow your ankles. You may know that the river rises after heavy rain far upstream, even though you have never seen the rain itself. That kind of knowledge matters. Ancient humans are not wandering through landscapes in permanent confusion. Survival rewards careful observation. You remember routes. You recognize seasons. You notice patterns in animals and plants. Water becomes another pattern to study. Where does the current weaken? When does the river fall? Which crossings remain shallow longest? Where do animals cross? Where do floating objects collect along the bank? For now, your safest solution is often timing. During a dry season, a river that normally blocks your route may shrink into several smaller channels. During colder periods, some northern waters may freeze. During low tide, coastal areas reveal paths and mudflats that disappear hours later. Human movement therefore bends around water, and this becomes especially important when you think not merely about one river, but entire landscapes. A valley may contain tributaries branching again and again. Wetlands can stretch farther than you can comfortably walk in a day. Lakes force long detours around their shorelines. Then there are islands. An island presents the problem in its purest form. You can see land. You cannot walk there. At some point in deep human history, groups reach places whose settlement requires water crossings. The precise methods are often impossible to reconstruct because wood, reeds, fibres, and hides decay easily. Stone survives beautifully. A bundle of ancient plant material tends to be less cooperative with archaeologists. This is one reason the origin of boats remains mysterious. The first successful watercraft may have vanished without leaving recognizable remains. Historians still argue whether deliberate water crossings began mainly from planned experimentation, repeated accidents, or gradual improvements in simpler ways of floating across rivers and coastal channels. The disagreement is not surprising. Nobody wrote down the meeting notes. There may never have been a single invention anyway. Boat building could emerge independently in many places because the problem appears independently in many places. A river in Africa does not care that another community somewhere in Asia is also annoyed by a river. Both groups face the same question. How do you make people, food, tools, and perhaps fire cross water without soaking everything or drowning anyone? That final problem, fire, deserves more attention than it usually receives. Fire is central to daily survival. It gives warmth, protection, cooking, light, and a way to process materials. Transporting glowing embers between camps may be easier than constantly starting fire from nothing. Now picture trying to swim while protecting an ember. Prehistoric logistics suddenly feel rather modern. You need your important things dry. Oddly enough, some hunter-gatherer communities known from much later periods became extraordinarily skilled at crossing rivers with almost nothing, sometimes using temporary aids or swimming techniques that leave little archaeological trace. That curious fact reminds you that ancient solutions do not always need to look like elaborate machines. The earliest response to a water barrier may be wonderfully unimpressive. You wait, you walk around, you wade, you carry belongings above your head, you cross in groups, you choose a calmer stretch, you use a seasonal ford. Perhaps somebody supports a child while another person carries tools. These methods work often enough that nobody needs to invent anything immediately. And that matters because invention requires pressure. If a problem is rare, you tolerate it. If it happens every week, you begin thinking, suppose your community depends increasingly on fishing. Now the best water is just beyond reach. Suppose animals repeatedly cross to an opposite bank. Now hunting rewards faster crossings. Suppose useful stone lies across a lake or channel. Now travel has economic value, even if nobody in your world would use that particular phrase. Suppose relatives live on the other side. Now water interferes with social life. A river is no longer scenery. It is a problem demanding attention. You can almost feel the thought forming, although it may take generations. Water supports things. Not everything sinks immediately. The observation is simple, but the consequences will eventually become enormous. Yet you do not rush there. For the moment, you remain on shore. You are still learning why crossing matters enough to risk experimentation. Near dusk, your group settles beside the river. Someone tends a small fire. Smoke hangs low before drifting toward the water. Food cooks slowly. Children move between adults while tools are repaired and baskets emptied across the darkening surface. Another bank remains visible. Perhaps animals move there. Perhaps another campfire appears. Perhaps you hear voices faintly carried by the evening air. The distance may be only a few hundred steps if land existed between you, but it does not. So the river changes geography. It makes nearby places far away. You begin to understand that ancient travel is not measured only in distance. It is measured in difficulty. A mountain can turn 10 miles into a journey. A swamp can turn 1 mile into an ordeal. A river can turn 50 paces into impossible territory. And human beings are unusually unwilling to accept impossible territory forever. That stubbornness is quiet tonight. Nothing dramatic happens. Nobody stands suddenly and announces the invention of naval engineering. You simply sit beside moving water and notice the problem again. The current murmurs beyond the firelight. Wet reeds brush against one another. Somewhere nearby a frog calls, then another answers. Your hands are warm from the fire while cool air settles across your shoulders. The opposite bank fades slowly into darkness. For generations, perhaps for thousands of years, people encounter scenes like this one. They study water, fear it, depend upon it, and test its boundaries. They learn that some barriers shrink with the seasons. They learn that some currents are forgiving. They learn that travelling around a lake can take days. They learn that food, stone, family, and opportunity sometimes exists frustratingly close across water. And little by little, the impossible begins to look less permanent. You do not yet know how to build a vessel. You do not need to. Tonight. The important thing is simpler. You have found a reason to try. The fire softens now, its crackling quieter as the wood settles into glowing red shapes. The river continues beside you without hurry, moving through darkness exactly as it has for countless generations. Your body grows heavier against the ground. The air smells of damp earth and faint smoke. Nothing asks anything more of you. The distant shore disappears. The problem can remain unsolved for tonight. You listen to water sliding past in the dark, steady and patient, and somewhere inside that ancient stillness rests a small, human thought that will one day change the world. There must be a way across. A branch breaks loose upstream and spins slowly into view. You notice it because almost everything else in the river seems to obey the current differently. Leaves vanish quickly. Small twigs twist, dip, and disappear. But this branch, pale where the bark has peeled away, stays on the surface. It rolls once. It bumps against a stone. Then it floats free again. You watch it travel farther than you expected. That simple sight contains one of the most important lessons in the long history of water travel. Some things float. Of course. Nobody in your world needs the word buoyancy. You do not need equations, measurements, or a lecture from someone holding a polished wooden pointer. You only need eyes. Wood remains on the surface. Dry branches sit higher than soaked ones. Large pieces of timber can support weight. Reeds gather into thick mats that drift rather than sink. Animal skins filled with air behave differently from wet hides pressed flat. The river becomes a teacher, and its lessons are wonderfully repetitive. Every flood brings debris. Every storm knocks branches into water. Every fallen tree becomes an experiment that nature performs without asking permission. You begin noticing differences. A dense stone drops immediately. A bone may sink or partly float depending on its shape and condition. A piece of bark can skim along the surface. Rotten wood behaves differently from hard green timber. You do not need to explain why. You only need to remember what works. Records confirm that humans have used naturally floating materials in countless environments, and the principle is so basic that it may have been discovered many times independently. No single genius needs to invent floating. The world demonstrates it constantly. A log drifting past camp is not a theory. It is evidence. And once you start paying attention, the possibilities become difficult to ignore. Perhaps you wade into shallow water and push a fallen trunk. It moves surprisingly easily. On land, the same trunk is heavy, awkward, and thoroughly committed to ruining your back. In water, much of its weight seems to vanish. That alone is a revelation. You place both hands on the wet bark and push. The trunk slides forward. You push harder. It glides farther. Now perhaps you lean across it. It sinks slightly beneath your weight but does not vanish. You press your chest against the wood and kick. For a few moments, your body stays higher in the water. This is not yet a boat. It is something more primitive, and perhaps more useful at first. It is support. Imagine crossing a calm pool while clinging to a branch. You still swim, but the branch keeps your face higher. Imagine placing a child across a floating log while adults guide it. Imagine tying a bundle of food to something that stays on the surface. The idea expands not because anyone designs a masterpiece, but because every successful use suggests another. Your hands discover what your mind cannot yet name. You learn that a floating object can carry some of the burden. You learn that balance matters. Lean too far and the log rolls. Climb too suddenly and it slips away. Choose a trunk that is too narrow and you spend most of the journey arguing with gravity. Choose one that is broad enough and suddenly the water feels less absolute. A curious footnote appears in the behavior of trees themselves. Some woods float better than others. Certain timbers remain buoyant even after long periods in water, while others absorb moisture, become heavy, or sink more readily. Ancient people living in different regions therefore face very different natural experiments. A riverside forest rich in light timber offers opportunities that a sparse landscape does not. You learn by touch. The bark may be slick. The wood may rotate beneath you. Branches snag your clothing. Sharp broken stubs scratch your legs. A floating trunk is helpful, yes, but it is not exactly considerate. So you adapt. Perhaps you strip troublesome branches. Perhaps you choose fallen wood, already worn smooth by water. Perhaps you sit astride the trunk instead of lying across it. Perhaps two people hold opposite sides. Small adjustments begin to accumulate. The accumulation is the heart of early technology. Nobody wakes up and invents a perfect vessel. You improve a bad solution, then someone else improves your improvement. Then another person notices that a different material behaves better. The shoreline gives you endless opportunities. Bundles of reeds are especially interesting. Individually, reeds are light and fragile. Together, they behave differently. You gather several under your arm and drop them into shallow water. They float. You press downward. They resist more than expected. You add more. The bundle becomes wider. Now it supports more weight. This is an important shift in thinking. You're no longer simply using what nature has provided in finished form. You're combining materials. That is a different kind of intelligence. A single stick floats. A collection of sticks can become a platform. A hide traps air. Several inflated skins can support cargo. Bark can be bent. Fibers can bind. Each material contributes something different. Scholars bicker over how early humans intentionally exploited these principles, mainly because the oldest organic materials rarely survive long enough to settle the argument. Stone tools may endure for hundreds of thousands of years. Reeds, bark, rope, and skin usually vanish, leaving archaeologists to infer behavior from migration patterns, settlement evidence, and what later traditional technologies show to be possible. This uncertainty makes the earliest experiments especially intriguing. You may be watching a history that leaves almost no trace. A log used once to cross a river does not become an artifact. It simply becomes a log again. A bundle of reeds may rot by the next season. A skin float may be reused for something else. The first floating aids could have been so temporary that they disappear almost completely from the archaeological record, and yet the logic remains. You live beside water. You see things float. You need to cross. Sooner or later, someone combines those facts. Picture a hot afternoon. The river is calmer than usual, sunlight flashing on the surface. You have been gathering food near the bank. A large piece of bark lies partly submerged, curved naturally into a shallow shape. You place a handful of nuts or shellfish on it. It stays afloat. Perhaps the bark turns. Perhaps everything falls in. A disappointing beginning. You try it again. You distribute the weight more evenly. The bark remains stable for a little longer. Now the water is carrying your food. That changes your relationship with the river. You're no longer merely trying to keep yourself afloat. You're beginning to move objects across water deliberately. The difference sounds small, but it is enormous. Cargo changes everything. A person can sometimes swim. A basket cannot. Firewood cannot. Stone tools do not appreciate being dropped into deep water. Dry hides, gathered plants, infants, elderly relatives, and food stores all create transportation problems. A floating support solves several at once. Perhaps your group begins pushing bundles along the shallows. Perhaps children learn to hold onto logs while adults guide them. Perhaps hunters use driftwood to cross narrow channels without exhausting themselves. These actions may look casual, almost playful, but repeated use turns accident into knowledge. You start choosing materials before reaching the water. That is the moment observation becomes planning. You no longer wait for a convenient branch to drift past. You bring one. The distinction matters. A naturally floating object is luck. A selected floating object is technology. You test different sizes. A thin branch works for one person but not two. A thick trunk supports more weight but becomes difficult to steer. Several smaller pieces can be tied together, though now you need cordage, and cordage itself is an extraordinary prehistoric achievement. Plant fibers can be twisted. Vines can be wrapped. Leather thongs can hold materials together. Without strong bindings, many later forms of watercraft would be impossible. But even before deliberate construction, simple fastening changes what you can do. Tie a bundle to a log and your hands are free. Secure two floating pieces together and they stop rolling so easily. Fasten reeds into a thick mass and the surface becomes broader. Oddly enough, the first useful discovery may not have been how to make something float, but how to stop floating things from behaving badly. Stability is everything. A single round log rotates. Two logs tied side by side resist rolling. Add a third and the surface becomes flatter. Your body learns this almost immediately. You shift your weight. The wood responds. You move closer to the center. The platform steadies. You place heavier objects low and near the middle. You begin understanding balance without ever naming center of gravity. There is a faint squeak of wet fiber tightening around wood. Your fingers sting from pulling cordage. The smell of crushed reeds clings to your hands. Mud dries along your ankles. The whole arrangement looks rough, temporary, and slightly ridiculous, which is exactly how many successful technologies begin. Function arrives long before elegance. You push the bundle into deeper water. It hesitates against the mud, then frees itself. The current takes hold. For a moment, you feel the strange sensation of standing beside something you assembled as it moves independently across the surface. The river has begun carrying your work. You walk alongside in the shallows, keeping one hand on the bundle. Then the bank drops away. Your feet lose contact with the bottom. Instinctively, you lean onto the floating mass. It dips. Water spills across the reeds, but it holds. You kick. The bundle moves. Slowly, badly, but unmistakably. Now the river is not merely pushing you. You're using the river. That change is subtle enough that no celebration follows. Nobody carves the date into stone. Nobody declares the opening of the maritime age. You simply learned that floating materials can extend the reach of the human body. And perhaps that is enough for many generations. The earliest water travel does not need to resemble the graceful boats you know from later civilizations. It can be awkward, temporary, and entirely practical. One person clings to wood, another pushes supplies across a calm inlet. Children ride a reed bundle through shallow water. Hunters move tools across a channel. Families discover that a barrier can be crossed without surrendering everything to the current. The psychological boundary begins to weaken. Water is still dangerous. It still demands respect, but it is no longer completely untouchable. You stand waist-deep near the bank as evening gathers. A floating log nudges gently against your hip. You place a hand on its rough surface. The bark is cold and wet. It carries your weight just enough. Not perfectly, not comfortably. Enough. And that word matters. Enough becomes useful. Useful becomes repeated. Repeated becomes understood. Understood becomes improved. The river continues moving around you, quiet and indifferent, while small pieces of wood drift past in the fading light. You watch them differently now. They are no longer debris, they are possibilities. Several logs drift together in a quiet bend of the river, trapped by roots and reeds. At first, they look like nothing more than storm debris. One trunk lies crooked across another. Smaller branches wedge themselves between them. Leaves gather in the gaps. Mud, grass, and bits of bark collect until the whole mass becomes strangely solid. Then you put a foot on it. The logs shift, but they do not roll apart. You place more weight on the nearest trunk. The mass moves slightly under you, creaking and dipping, yet the separate pieces support one another. A single log is unstable. Several together behave differently. You stand very still. Water slides beneath the tangled wood while your feet remain, more or less, dry. And somewhere inside this untidy natural platform lies the basic idea of the raft. Nobody needs to invent the concept from nothing. Floods assemble crude versions for you. Rivers gather fallen branches into mats. Storms push driftwood against shorelines. Vegetation knots itself around timber until a surface forms large enough for birds, small animals, and occasionally much heavier passengers. Nature is forever building terrible rafts. Your task is simply to notice that some of them work. You step farther onto the mass. The trunk separates slightly, immediately. You learn the weakness. Without binding, the platform is temporary. One piece rolls, another slides away. Your foot plunges ankle deep into cold water. This is not a disaster. It is information. You need the pieces to stay together. Along the bank, plant fibers twist naturally around stems. Vines trail between trees. Long grasses can be braided. Strips of hide can be cut and pulled tight. Roots can sometimes serve as cords. You begin thinking not about floating objects, but about fastening floating objects. That is an enormous conceptual leap disguised as a knot. Imagine collecting 3 reasonably straight logs. Already, you've created work for yourself. Trees do not fall in convenient sets of 3. One trunk is too thick, another is half rotten. A third has branches protruding from every possible direction, as if the tree spent its life preparing specifically to inconvenience boat builders. You drag them toward the water. The rough bark catches against stones. Your shoulders ache. Wood that feels light enough in the river becomes deeply unreasonable on land. So construction near the shoreline makes sense. You do not need to carry a finished raft far if the water can help support it. The first log enters the shallows, then the second. You position them side by side. They immediately drift apart. You pull them together again. Now comes the binding. Perhaps you twist plant fibre into cord. Perhaps you use vines directly. Perhaps you fasten cross pieces over the trunks and lash them down. The exact method varies with landscape and material, but the principle remains wonderfully simple. Keep the buoyant pieces connected. Records confirm that rafts and bundled reed craft eventually appear across widely separated cultures, from river systems to coastal regions, suggesting that the basic design is one of those technologies humans can discover independently wherever suitable materials and water barriers meet. A raft does not require a hollow hull. It does not need carefully shaped sides. It can be built from things that already float. This simplicity is its great advantage. You tighten the first binding, the fibres bite into wet bark. You add another, then another. Now the logs resist moving apart. You push the entire structure. Instead of 3 separate trunks wandering in different directions, the whole thing slides forward. That is a satisfying moment, perhaps suspiciously satisfying. You climb on. The raft sinks lower than expected. Water washes around your feet. You step toward one side and the platform tilts. You move back toward the centre. It steadies. There is another lesson. The raft can carry you but only if you respect balance. Add a second person, and the problem becomes more obvious. You both stand too close to the same edge. Water rises. Someone makes a startled noise. Both of you shuffle toward the middle with the dignity of people who would prefer nobody mention this later. The structure survives, so you begin arranging weight deliberately. People sit rather than stand. Heavy objects remain near the centre. Lighter bundles can be placed toward the ends. You learn that a broader raft gives more stability, but also requires more materials and becomes harder to move. A narrow raft travels through tight channels more easily, but offers less room. Engineering has entered your life. Though nobody calls it engineering, you're simply trying not to fall in. The materials themselves teach you further lessons. Fresh wood may be heavy but strong. Dry wood can float well but split. Rotten timber is light until you trust it with something important. Reeds offer another possibility. You gather them in large bundles. Individually they bend easily, but tightly tied together they form thick cylinders. Several bundles joined side by side create a soft, buoyant platform. The smell is sharp and green as you cut them. Your fingers become sticky with plant sap. Tiny insects escape from the stalks and crawl over your wrists. The finished craft feels different from wood. It flexes, it rustles, it sits higher or lower depending on how tightly the bundles are made. The surface is not perfectly flat. Nothing about it suggests luxury. Yet it floats. That is enough. Oddly enough, some traditional reed craft built in later societies could be surprisingly large and seaworthy, despite looking to modernize like oversized bundles of garden material. The trick lies in density, careful binding at a key, and shaping. That gives you a useful reminder. Sophistication does not always look sophisticated. A polished wooden hull seems advanced because it resembles modern expectations. A tied bundle of reeds may look primitive, but if it carries people safely across open water, appearances are doing very little useful work. Your raft begins as a crossing aid, but almost immediately it invites cargo. You place a basket on it, then stone tools, then a bundle of gathered plants, perhaps a haunch of meat. Suddenly you realize the platform can carry more than your body. Now transportation becomes the central advantage. Swimming moves a person, a raft moves belongings. That difference changes the scale of what water travel can accomplish. You could shift camp supplies across a river. You could carry harvested food from wetlands. You could move building materials. You could transport someone injured or too young to swim. You could bring several tools without deciding which one deserves to stay dry most. Even a modest raft turns water into part of the route instead of the end of it. But the current has us pinions. You push away from shore using a long branch. For a few moments, everything works beautifully. Then the water catches the raft and rotates it. The opposite bank begins sliding sideways in your vision. You jab the pole down. It finds no bottom. An unfortunate discovery. You're floating, certainly. You're also going somewhere you did not select. This is the problem with rafts. Buoyancy is not control. A river can carry your platform faster than you can guide it. So early crossings likely favour calm water, protected shallows, slow channels, lake shores, and places where currents are predictable. You learn to read the surface. Smooth water may hide depth. Ripples reveal submerged stones. Floating leaves show current direction. Eddies spin debris in circles. A darker channel may indicate deeper water. You do not see water as empty space. You see patterns. A long pole becomes useful where the bottom is reachable. You plant one end into mud or gravel and push. The raft glides forward. The pole comes free with a sucking sound. You plant it again. Now movement becomes deliberate. Not elegant, perhaps, but deliberate. There is a rhythm to it. Push, recover, balance. Push again. The wet wood creaks beneath you. Bindings tighten as the logs shift. Water taps gently against the underside. The shoreline moves. For the first time, you feel not simply supported by a floating object, but transported by one. Scholars still argue whether the earliest rafts were developed primarily for river crossings, fishing, shoreline gathering, or more ambitious coastal movement. The materials decay so completely that certainty is difficult, and the same basic craft could have served several purposes at once. That uncertainty leaves room for a very human possibility. Perhaps people build rafts because they are useful. Then they discover new uses. A platform meant for crossing becomes a fishing platform. A fishing platform becomes a cargo carrier. A cargo carrier makes longer journeys possible. Invention rarely remains obedient to its first purpose. You begin fishing from the raft. Standing is awkward, so you sit. From this position, you can reach deeper water without swimming. You lower a line, trap, basket, or spear. The river beneath you becomes accessible in a new way. Fish that once remained beyond reach now enter your working world. Wetland plants farther from shore become easier to gather. Bird nests on small islands become reachable. Even the simple act of checking traps changes when you can carry equipment across water. The raft is no longer merely solving a barrier. It is expanding territory. That expansion can influence settlement. A group living beside a lake may begin using areas that were previously inconvenient. A riverside community may reach both banks regularly. Seasonal camps can be connected more easily. Resources once separated by water become part of one larger landscape. The map inside your head changes. You stop seeing the river only as a line dividing places. It becomes a surface with roots. You know where the current is gentle. You know which landing place has firm ground. You know where submerged branches threaten the bindings. You know which bend catches driftwood. You know where morning mist makes navigation difficult. Knowledge of water becomes as important as knowledge of trails. And because rafts are relatively simple to repair, they reward experimentation. A binding loosens. You replace it. A log becomes waterlogged or you swap it out. The platform is too narrow. You add another piece. The front catches vegetation. You trim the branches. Each inconvenience produces a modification. One scandalous aside from practical life is that your magnificent new transportation device may also become an irresistible plaything for children. It is easy to imagine younger members of a community climbing onto floating bundles, pushing one another from shore, and discovering balance through games long before anyone explains rules to them. Children are remarkably efficient research departments when the research involves getting wet. Adults may pretend disapproval while quietly noticing what works. A wider bundle is harder to tip. A shorter one turns more easily. A pole gives control. Two people can coordinate their movements. Play becomes experiment. Experiment becomes skill. The craft itself remains humble. No raised sides, no enclosed hull, no graceful prow. Just buoyant material held together firmly enough to support weight. But simplicity can be powerful. A raft can be made quickly. It can use local materials. It can carry loads. It can be enlarged. It can be repaired without specialized tools. In some environments, there is little reason to abandon it. You stand at the edge of calm water near sunset. The raft rests half on mud, half afloat. Its bindings are dark with the moisture. The logs bear scratches from stone and sand. A few reeds have worked loose and trail in the water. It looks worn already. Useful things often do. You push it free. The platform slides outward. You step aboard carefully, placing your feet near the center. This time, the structure does not surprise you. You know its movement. You understand how far it will tilt. You recognize the soft pull of current against one side. The long pole settles into your hands. You push. The bank begins to recede. Water passes beneath a surface that did not exist until human hands tied separate pieces together. That may be the true magic of the raft. Nothing in it is new. Logs already float. Fibers already twist. Water already carries. Your achievement is arrangement. You take familiar materials and make them cooperate. And on the quiet surface, with wet wood beneath your feet and cool air against your face, a scattered collection of natural objects becomes something unmistakably human. A vehicle? Smoke curls from a fallen tree while you stand beside it with a stone tool in your hand. At first glance, this is a terrible place to build anything. The trunk is enormous. It lies half buried in leaves and damp soil, thick enough that you could spend days hacking at it and still make only a shallow scar. Your tool is sharp, but not magically sharp. It is stone, carefully flaked, fitted to a handle, and already showing the sort of wear that suggests the tree is winning. So you stop chopping, you bring fire. A small bed of embers is placed on the upper surface of the trunk. Dry bark catches first. Tiny flames lift and settle. The scent of resin mixes with wood smoke. Heat begins doing what your arms struggle to achieve. The surface blackens. You let it burn. Then you scrape away the charcoal. Suddenly the wood beneath is softer. You burn again, scrape again, burn, scrape, slowly, patiently. The inside of the tree begins to disappear. This is one of the most elegant prehistoric tricks in the history of woodworking. You're not trying to overpower the trunk. You are persuading it to become hollow. The dugout canoe is a wonderfully direct idea. Take one large piece of wood and remove everything that does not belong inside the boat. Simple in principle. Slightly less simple when the tree weighs more than several people, and your workshop contains no metal saw, no steel adze, and absolutely no hardware store. The first task begins long before hollowing. You need the right tree. Size matters, but so does species. A trunk must be broad enough to hold a person and thick enough that removing its centre does not leave dangerously thin walls. The wood should be workable but not so soft that it cracks or rots quickly. You walk through forest with a different eye now. A tree is no longer simply shade, fuel, bark, or a source of branches. It can contain a vessel. That change in perception is profound. A canoe exists inside the trunk before anyone cuts it free. Your job is to release it. Perhaps a suitable tree falls naturally in a storm. That saves an extraordinary amount of effort. Perhaps fire is used around the base of a standing tree. carefully controlled so that the trunk weakens while stone tools cut into the charred wood. Felling a large tree with prehistoric technology demands planning, patience, and quite a lot of confidence that everyone knows where not to stand. You strike with a stone axe. The sound is dull and heavy. Chip by chip, fibers separate. Your shoulders grow sore. The tree remains impressively unconcerned. Fire helps. Heat weakens selected areas, and charred wood becomes easier to remove. You must control the flames. However, too little burning and progress is painfully slow. Too much and you damage the very wood you need to preserve. This becomes a craft of restraint. You learn how long to let embers sit. You learn how wet clay can protect areas from burning. You learn to scrape away charcoal before the heat reaches too deeply. You learn that fire is both tool and threat. Records confirm that prehistoric dugout canoes survive archaeologically in waterlogged environments where oxygen is limited enough to slow decay. Some examples from Europe are thousands of years old, demonstrating that people were shaping substantial wooden vessels long before metal tools became common. The survival of such craft is almost accidental. Normally, wood disappears, fungi attack it, insects invade it, water, air, and microorganisms gradually reduce an entire boat to nothing. But in peat bogs, lake sediments, and saturated ground, a canoe can sometimes remain hidden for millennia. Imagine the strange luck involved. A vessel built by hands in deep prehistory sinks, is abandoned, or becomes buried in mud. The mud protects it. Thousands of years later, other humans discover the shape again. The boat has outlived languages, villages, kingdoms, and nearly every memory of the people who made it. Your own concern is less dramatic. You're trying not to burn through the bottom. The hollow grows deeper. You use a stone adze to chip away softened wood. The tool has a cutting edge mounted across the handle, allowing you to work downward more efficiently than with an axe. Each strike removes a small piece. Tock, tock, tock. The sound repeats through the trees. Someone else scrapes charcoal. Another person tends the embers. Someone checks the thickness of the remaining walls. This kind of boat building is difficult to imagine as entirely solitary work. A large canoe can demand many hours of labour. The trunk must be moved. The fire must be watched. The wood must be shaped. The final vessel may require several people to drag it toward water. Technology becomes social simply because the object is too large to ignore everyone else. There is another challenge: symmetry. If one side is too thick, the canoe becomes unnecessarily heavy. If one side is too thin, it may crack. If the floor is uneven, water collects awkwardly and balance suffers. You cannot measure with modern instruments, but your hands become measuring tools. You tap the wood. You judge thickness by sight. You compare one side with the other. You run your palm along the inner surface, feeling bumps and ridges. You scrape where the wood remains heavy. Slowly the cavity becomes smoother. The smell changes as fresh wood is exposed. Smoke clings to your hair and skin. Fine charcoal darkens your hands. Each time you wipe sweat from your forehead, you probably make yourself look more committed to the project than you intended. Oddly enough, controlled burning can sometimes help harden or preserve certain wooden surfaces, but only when handled carefully. Excessive charring weakens timber, so the craft lies in knowing exactly when the fire has done enough. This is a technology built on judgment. There is no alarm telling you to remove the embers, no gauge measuring wall thickness, no pleasant voice announcing that your canoe is now 70% complete. You learn from mistakes. Perhaps one vessel cracks during construction. Perhaps another becomes too thin on one side. Perhaps a badly shaped bow pushes water rather than cutting through it. Failure teaches quickly when the project requires days of labour. The outer surface now receives attention. You trim projecting knots. You shape the ends. A blunt trunk can float perfectly well, but a narrower bow moves through water more easily. You begin noticing that shape affects motion. This is a new level of design. The raft depends mostly on buoyant material. The dugout depends on the hollow space and the shape of the hull. You lower the trunk into shallow water. It floats higher than it did before hollowing because much of its weight has been removed. You place one hand on the side, it rolls slightly. That is the first warning. A dugout may look like a complete boat, but it can be surprisingly unstable. A narrow hull is especially eager to teach humility. You climb in carefully. Your feet settle on the curved floor. The canoe tilts. You freeze. It settles again. You shift your hips. The vessel responds immediately. Every movement matters. You begin understanding that the boat and the body must cooperate. Sitting low improves balance. Keeping weight centered helps. Sudden movements are discouraged with great efficiency. Someone steps in behind you. The canoe wobbles again. Nobody moves for a moment. This is probably the earliest form of teamwork training. Once stable, however, the vessel feels remarkably different from a flat platform. Your body is surrounded by wood. Cargo can sit inside rather than on top. Water splashing over the sides collects in the hollow, which is inconvenient. But objects are less likely to roll away. The canoe can be narrow enough to slip through reeds and channels. It can be pushed from shore more smoothly. Its shaped ends reduce resistance. You are beginning to travel in the water rather than merely upon floating material. Scholars still argue whether some of the earliest dugouts developed primarily from woodworking traditions on land or from deliberate attempts to improve water transport. Hollow trunks may first have been used as containers, troughs, or other objects, and the exact path from woodworking to canoe building remains difficult to reconstruct. The debate matters because inventions rarely appear from a single cause. You already know how to burn wood. You already know how to scrape it. You already know how to shape handles, bowls, and tools. A dugout canoe combines existing skills in a new scale and purpose. That is often how technological change happens, not by creating knowledge from nothing, but by rearranging familiar knowledge around a new problem. You begin testing the canoe. A pole works in shallow water. In deeper water, you need another method. You use a short piece of wood to push against the water itself. One stroke barely seems to matter. Another turns the bow. You try again. The canoe responds. You are discovering that a shaped vessel offers more control than a broad floating platform. It can turn. It can accelerate. It can be directed through narrower spaces. That control gives access to water that would otherwise remain awkward or dangerous. A fisherman can approach quiet shallows without wading. A hunter can move through marsh channels. Gatherers can reach islands of vegetation surrounded by deep mud. Supplies remain more contained. The canoe becomes not merely a crossing device but a working space. You can imagine carrying nets, baskets, spears, food, children, firewood, or freshly cut plants. The hollow inside the trunk changes transport fundamentally. Cargo no longer needs to be tied directly to the surface. It has a place, and humans are extremely fond of places to put things. One quirky inconvenience soon becomes obvious. A dugout filled with rainwater is less a boat and more a very heavy wooden bath. You scoop water out using hands, shells, bark containers, or bowls. Keeping the interior dry becomes routine. Small cracks can be filled or sealed with resin, pitch, fibre, or other local materials. You inspect the hull repeatedly. Watercraft create maintenance. The river offers transportation, but charges a fee in repairs. Over time, builders become skilled at reading wood. They know which cracks are harmless. They recognize rot. They understand how drying affects shape. Some dugouts may be widened deliberately by heating the hull and forcing the sides apart with braces while the wood is flexible. The technique requires remarkable control. Too much pressure can split the vessel, applied correctly. It can make the canoe broader and more stable without starting from a wider tree. You see how far the craft has moved from simple hollowing. Fire fells. Fire hollows. Heat can even reshape. The same dangerous element that cooks food and warms camp becomes part of naval architecture. You run your fingers over the inside wall. The surface bears marks from tools and flame. There are small irregularities everywhere. Nothing is machine smooth. Nothing needs to be. The canoe's beauty lies in usefulness. It is one object, one tree, one carefully emptied trunk, and yet it can carry several people through a landscape that once forced them to remain at the edge. You push away from the bank. The hull glides forward. Instead of water washing across your feet, the sides hold it back. You sit within the vessel, close to the surface but separated from it. A paddle enters the water. The blade pulls. The canoe moves. There is a quiet satisfaction in the motion. The tree has not stopped being wood. It still bears knots, grain, smoke stains, and scars from stone tools. But its relationship with the world has changed completely. A tree that once stood rooted to one place now carries human beings wherever water allows. The forest has become transportation, and fire, controlled carefully enough not to destroy, has helped turn something immovable into something that can glide. The shoreline does not end in a riverbank this time. It opens into salt water. You stand where waves repeatedly smooth the sand, leaving dark bands of shells, weed, and driftwood. The air tastes different here. It carries salt onto your lips. Wind presses against your skin without trees to slow it. Far beyond the shallows, the surface changes colour from pale green to deep blue, and somewhere beyond that water lies land you cannot reach by walking. This is where the history of boats becomes much more serious. A river crossing can be brief, a lake can often be circled, but open sea demands a different confidence. You must leave the shelter of shore. You must trust something built by human hands. You must carry enough food and water to survive if the crossing lasts longer than expected. You must judge weather, current, distance, and direction without charts. Most importantly, you must believe that there is somewhere worth going. Imagine standing on an island or coastal headland in Southeast Asia during deep prehistory. The geography around you is not exactly the geography known today. Sea levels rise and fall dramatically over long periods as ice sheets expand and retreat. During colder phases, large areas of continental shelf become dry land. Islands merge into larger land masses. Narrow seas become narrower. Yet not every channel disappears. Some stretches of water remain, and humans cross them. Records confirm that people reached Australia at least around 50,000 years ago, and possibly earlier depending on how particular archaeological evidence is interpreted. However the journey happened, at least some part of it required deliberate movement across sea, because Australia was never fully connected to Southeast Asia by dry land during the period when modern humans arrived. That fact is astonishing if you let it settle. You are dealing with people who possess no compass, no metal tools, no written maps, no weather forecast, no harbour, no lighthouse, no rescue service, and still they move across water far enough to reach an entire continent. The crossings involved may not have been a single heroic voyage across a huge blank ocean. They were more likely made through chains of islands and visible or partly visible landmasses, with journeys broken into stages. But even a relatively short open water passage changes everything. Once the shore disappears behind you, the familiar world becomes uncertain. Waves feel larger when you sit close to them. Wind changes direction. A current can pull you sideways without making the mistake obvious. Clouds hide distant land. Salt spray wets tools and food. A stable craft in a sheltered lagoon may behave very differently in a rolling swell. You need preparation. Perhaps several vessels travel together. That would make sense for migration. One craft carrying a single brave explorer achieves very little if the goal is to establish a new community. Families, tools, food, fire-making equipment, and social knowledge must cross too. You cannot found a population with the enthusiasm alone. So picture a departure that feels less like adventure and more like careful logistics. Food is gathered, containers are filled, stone tools are selected, cordage is checked, children are kept close, the craft are inspected again and again. Someone presses a thumb against a binding. Someone replaces a weakened fibre. Someone rearranges cargo to keep the weight balanced. You can almost hear the quiet, practical conversation. Not grand speeches, questions. Is that bundle secure? Where is the drinking water? Who carries the cutting tools? Who sits where? Has anyone seen the child who was just told not to climb on that prehistoric travel remains human travel? Nobody stops being ordinary simply because future archaeologists find the journey impressive. The craft themselves may be rafts, dugouts, bundled reed vessels, or technologies whose exact form has disappeared. That uncertainty matters. Wood vanishes, fibre vanishes, bark vanishes. The ocean is especially effective at erasing evidence, so archaeologists often know that people crossed water long before they know exactly what they crossed it in. No agreement has been reached on whether the first long-distance sea crossings were usually planned migrations, exploratory voyages, accidental drift events followed by survival, or some mixture that differed from place to place. Accident may explain an individual journey. A storm can push a fishing party away from shore. Currents can carry a craft farther than expected, but repeated settlement is harder to explain entirely by accident. If a distant island develops a stable human population, especially one carrying tools, traditions, and enough people to reproduce across generations, deliberate travel becomes increasingly plausible. You sit low in a vessel as the coast recedes. The sound of breaking waves grows softer behind you. At first, you keep turning your head. Land is still visible. Then haze begins to blur it. The horizon becomes smooth. Your stomach notices the movement before your mind does. The craft rises, pauses, falls. A wave strikes the side with a hollow slap. You grip the edge. This is not the gentle water of an inland pool. The sea moves beneath you in several directions at once. You learn quickly that controlling a vessel on open water requires rhythm. If you paddle against every wave, you exhaust yourself. If you fight the current blindly, you may make little progress. You watch experienced people, they read the water. They notice the shape of swells. They watch birds. They observe clouds. They feel wind direction on the face. They notice floating vegetation. Navigation begins with attention. Some clues are surprisingly subtle. Seabirds may fly toward feeding grounds in the morning and return toward land later. Clouds can form over islands. Reflections from shallow lagoons may alter the colour beneath clouds. Wave patterns can bend around distant land. These skills become famous in later Pacific navigation traditions, but the deeper principle is ancient. A navigator does not travel through empty ocean. The ocean is full of information. You simply need to know how to read it. A curious footnote is that humans may have learned parts of this skill while fishing close to shore, long before undertaking serious voyages. Every short trip teaches something about currents, winds, tides, and landmarks. Experience accumulates almost invisibly. The first generation ventures a little farther from the beach. The next knows where fish gather beyond the reef. Another learns which headland remains visible longest. Someone discovers that a particular island can be reached when the morning wind is mild. Long-distance travel grows from hundreds of small observations. It does not need one spectacular invention. You begin to notice the importance of timing. Leaving at the wrong hour can turn an easy passage into exhausting labour. Tides may expose rocks. Afternoon winds may strengthen. Seasonal weather can make a channel safe for weeks and dangerous for months. A successful seafarer does not merely know where to go. You know when. The sun becomes a guide. Its rising and setting provide broad direction. Stars can provide additional orientation at night, although exactly how early humans deliberately used celestial navigation remains uncertain. You do not need a formal star map to notice that some stars appear consistently in certain parts of the sky. Repeated journeys create memory. Memory becomes root knowledge becomes tradition. You can imagine such knowledge being spoken rather than drawn. Travel until the headland disappears. Keep the morning sun to one side. Watch for a particular bird. Expect stronger current near the channel. Look for cloud gathering above the distant ridge. Directions become stories because stories are easier to remember. And once crossing becomes reliable, islands stop being isolated. They become connected points. People move between them. So do objects. Stone from one island may appear on another. Shell ornaments travel. Food plants eventually travel. Languages and customs spread. Marriage partners move between communities. The sea, which seems at first like a barrier, becomes a corridor. This is one of the great reversals in human history. People who learn to travel by water do not simply overcome geography, they rearrange it. A coastline that once ends movement now begins a route. An island that once appears remote becomes a stopping place. A channel becomes something measured not by fear, but by travel time. Of course, the danger does not disappear. Storms arrive, craft break, people become lost. A crossing successful 9 times can become disastrous on the 10th. The sea never signs an agreement promising consistency. That may help explain why successful maritime knowledge becomes precious. You listen to people who have crossed before. You respect those who understand currents. You copy methods that work. A poorly tied craft is not a charming experiment when children and food are aboard. Reliability matters. Construction becomes more careful. Bindings are doubled. Cargo is secured. Food is protected from spray. Water containers are placed where they will not roll. Perhaps several craft keep within sight of one another. This is no longer simply floating. It is organized travel. The psychological step may be as important as the technical one. To cross open water, you must accept a period in which you cannot touch land. That requires trust. Trust in materials, trust in companions, trust in memory, trust in judgment, and perhaps trust that the faint shape ahead really is an island and not the sort of cloud that causes arguments. One scandalous aside from seafaring life is that seasickness probably deserves a place in the story. Ancient people are still human. A highly skilled navigator can understand currents beautifully and still spend part of the voyage deeply regretting lunch. There is something comforting about that. The achievement does not require superhuman people. It requires ordinary people becoming extremely good at a difficult task. Hours pass. The sun changes position. Your shoulders ache from paddling. Salt dries on your arms. The vessel smells of wet wood, fibre, food, and human bodies packed closer together than anyone would choose on land. Then someone points. At first, you see nothing, only glare. Then the horizon develops an irregular line. Dark, low, real, land. The effect on everyone is immediate. Bodies straighten. Paddling becomes more energetic. Details slowly appear. A ridge, trees, perhaps birds circling inland. The waves begin changing as the seabed rises beneath them. You smell vegetation before you clearly see the beach. The sea has carried you into another world. You enter shallow water. Someone jumps out too early and immediately discovers that shallow is a flexible concept. The craft is pulled toward shore. Feet touch sand. Cargo is lifted out. Children move away from the water. People look inland. Nothing announces that a historic event has occurred. There is no monument waiting, no inscription. Only unfamiliar trees, unfamiliar sounds, and the strange satisfaction of standing somewhere that could not be reached on foot. That is enough. because every successful sea crossing expands what human beings understand as reachable. The horizon stops being a border, it becomes a question. And once people discover that land can exist beyond open water, the sea begins offering not merely danger, but possibility. You stand at the edge of the new shore with salt drying on your skin. Behind you, the vessel rocks gently in the shallows. Its materials are simple. Its achievement is not. Human hands have taken wood, fibre, bark, reeds, skill, memory, courage, and stubborn practicality, and carried life across a space where walking ends. The water stretches back toward a coast you can no longer see, yet you know it is there, and for the first time, distance across the sea feels measurable. Not impossible. Measurable. The tree line thins until there is almost nothing left worth calling timber. You stand beside a wide stretch of water in a landscape where wood is scarce. Reeds are everywhere, and the wind keeps flattening the taller stalks into whispering waves of green and gold. If boat building depended entirely on giant trees, your maritime ambitions would end here. Fortunately, human beings are very good at refusing to accept shortages as final answers. You walk into the marsh. The mud presses between your toes. Reeds sway above your shoulders. Their dry outer surfaces rasp softly against one another, while the freshly cut stems release a clean, grassy scent. One reed is almost useless as a vessel. 1,000 reeds are a different matter. You cut them near the base and begin gathering them into thick bundles. The work is repetitive. Cut, stack, bind, tighten, then do it again. A single bundle feels surprisingly firm when compressed. Air remains trapped inside and between the hollow stems. The bundle is light enough to drag, yet thick enough to support weight when placed on water. You make another, then another. Several are tied together. Now the structure has width. You lift one edge, push it toward the water, and watch the marsh itself become transportation. This is one of the great advantages of reedcraft. The materials may grow directly beside the route you want to travel. You do not need to fell a huge tree. You do not need to hollow a trunk for days. You harvest many smaller pieces and turn them into something larger through organization. That sounds almost obvious. It is not. A reed boat asks you to understand strength collectively. One stalk bends. A bundle resists. One bundle floats. Several bundles form a hull. Shape them carefully and the ends can rise above the surface, helping the craft meet waves instead of simply accepting them in the face. You tighten the lashings. Wet fibre stretches differently from dry fibre, so you learn to account for that. Bind too loosely and the structure opens. Bind too tightly in the wrong place and the reeds crush or deform. You begin shaping by pressure. The craft takes form beneath your hands. Its body is rounded. Its ends taper. The surface feels springy rather than rigid. When you push it into the water, it settles softly instead of knocking against the bank like a heavy log. You step aboard. There is a faint crunching sound from compressed stems. The craft flexes. For a moment, you wonder whether this was a brilliant idea. Then it steadies. You sit. The reeds hold. Records confirm that reed boats were used in several ancient regions, including the Nile Valley, Mesopotamia, and areas around Lake Titicaca, where communities developed sophisticated craft from locally abundant plant materials. Different places create different designs. That matters. There is no single universal boat waiting to be invented once and copied everywhere. Environment chooses much of the vocabulary. Where large straight trees are plentiful, wood makes sense. Where wetlands dominate, reeds become obvious candidates. Where timber is limited but animal hides are available, another solution appears. You begin with a frame. Thin branches bend more easily than thick logs. You arrange them into ribs and cross pieces. The structure looks almost like a basket laid on its side. That comparison is useful because basket making and boat building can share similar skills. Weaving, binding, shaping flexible material, keeping tension even. A person who knows how to make a strong basket already understands something about creating a light framework that holds its form. Now you stretch hide over it. The skin has been cleaned, prepared, and softened. Wet hide can be pulled tight. As it dries, it contracts. The frame stiffens beneath it. You fasten the edges carefully. The result is startlingly light. A boat large enough to carry a person can sometimes be lifted by 1 or 2 people. That changes everything about transport over land. A heavy dugout is magnificent until you need to move it around a waterfall. A skin-covered craft can be carried. You reach a shallow river. The boat comes off your shoulder. You set it down. Moments later, you're afloat again. Portability becomes part of the design. That is a very different problem from simply staying above water. You are no longer asking, can this float? You're asking, can I carry it, repair it, launch it, and use it repeatedly across a landscape where water and land alternate? The answer shapes the vessel. A hide boat may have a broad, rounded bottom for stability. Some traditions produce small circular or oval craft. Others create longer, framed boats suited to coastal conditions. The skin itself needs protection. Water is patient. Given enough time, it finds weaknesses. Seams matter. Holes matter. Stretching matters. You coat vulnerable surfaces with grease, resin, pitch, or other water-resistant substances available locally. The smell can be powerful: fat, smoke, hide, plant resin, damp fibre. Nobody mistakes the workshop for a flower garden, but waterproofing matters far more than elegance. A tiny leak is not immediately disastrous. You can scoop water, you can patch the hole. You learn where wear appears first. The bottom rubs against stones, the sides scrape banks, bindings loosen, skins dry, shrink, and sometimes crack. So the vessel becomes a maintained object rather than a finished object. That distinction is important. Ancient technology survives because people keep repairing it. A boat is not built once and then trusted forever. You inspect it, patch it, dry it, retighten it, replace worn bindings, renew waterproof coatings. A reliable craft is partly a construction and partly a habit. Oddly enough, some skin boats known from later historical and ethnographic traditions are so light that a skilled user can carry one upside down on the head or shoulders, turning a vessel into something closer to portable equipment than a fixed piece of infrastructure. That makes you look at the frame differently. Lightness is not weakness. Sometimes lightness is the entire point. Now consider bark. A tree does not need to become a hollowed trunk to become a boat. In some environments, large sheets of bark can be removed carefully, heated or soaked to make them flexible, then bent upward and stitched or fastened into shape. The ends are closed. A framework strengthens the inside. Seams are sealed. You end with a vessel that uses only a fraction of the tree's mass. The process demands precision. Remove bark carelessly and it splits. Bend it too sharply and it cracks. Pierce it poorly and the fastening tears through. You learn to work with the material rather than against it. That principle repeats everywhere. Reeds want bundling. Hide wants stretching. Bark wants bending. Wood wants hollowing. Good boat building is partly the art of discovering what a material already wants to do. You're not forcing everything into the same solution. You are listening to matter. A cold iron latch is many thousands of years away. Your tools are stone, bone, shell, wood, and fibre. Yet the design decisions are already sophisticated. How thick should the frame be? How wide should the craft sit? How much weight can it carry? Where should the strongest lashings go? How high must the sides rise? How much flexibility is useful before flexibility becomes instability? These are engineering questions without formal engineering language. Experience supplies the mathematics. You know that 3 passengers are too many because the water reaches the rim. You know that one more bundle of reeds raises the craft higher. You know a wider bottom feels steadier. You know a longer hull may travel straighter. No written formula is required. The body remembers, so does the community. Scholars still argue whether some early framed and skin-covered craft developed directly from basketry traditions, from temporary river crossing devices, or from independent experiments with hides and flexible branches. The evidence is frustratingly fragile. A stone axe can sit underground for ages. A stitched hide boat usually cannot. Even bark vessels leave little behind unless conditions are exceptional. This creates a strange imbalance in what survives. Prehistoric people may appear archaeologically obsessed with stone simply because stone has excellent long-term storage. Their worlds were actually full of materials that decay. Wooden containers, fibre ropes, nets, mats, baskets, hides, reed bundles, bark sheets. All of these can matter enormously while leaving almost nothing for distant descendants to find. You sit beside a nearly completed skin boat and run your hand along the frame beneath the covering. The ribs create a repeating pattern. The hide is taut. Each binding connects one small part to another. There is no massive piece anywhere. Strength comes from relationships. That idea distinguishes framed boats beautifully. A dugout is strong because one large trunk remains mostly intact. A framed vessel is strong because many light pieces support one another. The concept allows enormous flexibility. If a rib breaks, replace it. If skin tears, patch it. If the frame needs widening, alter the structure. Construction becomes modular before anyone invents that convenient word. A scandalous little aside is that waterproofing substances probably make every newly finished craft slightly unpleasant to sit inside on a hot day. Grease softens, pitch becomes sticky, resin clings to skin. A boat may be technologically impressive while also attaching itself gently to your clothing. Prehistoric innovation does not promise comfort, it promises usefulness. You launch the craft, it rests lightly on the surface. The rounded frame responds immediately when you shift your body. You push with a paddle. The hull moves smoothly because it carries relatively little dead weight of its own. Much of its buoyancy is available for you and your cargo. You begin to understand that there is no single path from floating object to boat. Humans solve the same challenge through completely different materials. In one marsh, a family binds reeds. Along another coast, people stretch hide over frames. In forest country, bark is shaped. Elsewhere, trunks are hollowed. In each case, the water imposes similar demands, but the land supplies different answers. That diversity may be one of the most important features of early watercraft. People do not wait for ideal resources. They adapt technology to what exists. A treeless region is not boatless. A marsh without large timber is not trapped. A rocky coast can still produce seafarers. The landscape limits choices. Certainly, it also encourages invention. You begin looking around with new eyes. Grass can become rope. Reeds can become hulls. Branches can become frames. Skin can become waterproof covering. Bark can become sides. Resin can become sealant. Objects that seem unrelated on land begin working together at the water's edge. There is something quietly beautiful about that. The vessel is not separate from its environment. It is assembled from the environment. You can smell the marsh in it. You can feel the animal hide. You can see the grain of bent wood. You can touch the knots tied by familiar hands. The boat carries the landscape with you. Late in the day, you pull the light craft onto shore. No team is required. The hull slides over wet grass. You lift one end and carry it above the reach of the water. A few drops fall from the skin. The frame creaks softly. Behind you, reeds move in the evening wind, almost identical to the reeds that might become another vessel. There is no shortage of possibility here, only materials waiting to be understood. You rest the craft on the ground. It is light, patched, practical, and built from pieces that separately seem too fragile for the task. Together, they carry a human being across water, and that may be one of the oldest lessons in invention. You rarely need perfect materials. You need to understand the materials you have. The pole slips from the riverbed. For one uncomfortable second, you feel almost weightless. Your boat keeps moving, but the long wooden shaft in your hands no longer finds mud, gravel, or anything solid beneath the surface. You push downward again. Nothing. The water is too deep. A pole works beautifully when the bottom is close enough to reach. It lets you shove directly against the earth. But now the channel drops away beneath you, and the old method suddenly becomes useless. You are floating over depth. So you try something simpler. You place a flat piece of wood into the water beside the boat and pull it toward your hip. The vessel moves. Not much, but it moves. You do it again. The bow shifts slightly. Again. This time you can feel resistance through your hands, a steady pressure building against the wood as you draw it backward. You're not pushing against the bottom now. You're pushing against the water itself. That distinction seems tiny, yet it transforms travel. A pole ties you to shallow water. A paddle releases you from it. At first, the object in your hands may not look like the elegant paddle you imagine today. It could be a flattened branch, a carved board, or a length of wood with one end widened deliberately. The idea is brutally practical. More surface area pushes more water. A narrow stick moves through the water easily but gives little force. A broad blade resists. That resistance becomes propulsion. You learn this through your shoulders. Pull a thin pole through deep water and very little happens. Pull a broad blade and the boat answers immediately. Records confirm that paddles appear in prehistoric archaeological contexts, including waterlogged sites where wooden artifacts survive under unusually favourable conditions. Their existence shows that early boat users were not satisfied with simply drifting or pushing from shallow bottoms. They developed tools specifically for controlled movement across deeper water. You grip the shaft with both hands. The wood is smooth where repeated use has polished it. The blade enters with a soft splash. You pull. Water curls around the edge. The craft glides forward. You lift the paddle and droplets scatter across your legs. Then you repeat the motion. There is rhythm in it almost immediately, surf reach, dip, pull, lift, recover, reach again. At first, you use too much force. Your shoulders tense. The paddle strikes the surface noisily. Half your effort seems devoted to throwing water into the boat. This is not ideal. Someone more experienced watches you and quietly demonstrates. The blade enters more cleanly. The pull stays close to the hull. The movement is shorter and smoother. The boat travels farther with less effort. That is when you begin to understand that paddling is not just strength. It is technique. A strong person can waste energy beautifully. A skilled paddler turns small movements into steady speed. Your body adapts. The hands loosen. The shoulders stop fighting the water. Your back joins the motion. You learn to pull from the torso instead of exhausting the arms. The craft settles into a smooth pace. Water makes a repeating hush along the sides. The shore begins slipping past. Now you discover the next problem. Going forward is easy. Going straight is not. Every stroke on one side nudges the boat slightly toward the other. You paddle on the right. The bow turns left. You paddle on the left. The bow turns right. A narrow canoe can become surprisingly enthusiastic about changing direction. So you alternate strokes. Right, left, right, left. The vessel begins to hold a straighter course. This simple coordination dramatically increases control. If two people paddle together, timing matters even more. One person sits toward the front, another sits behind. If both pull randomly, the canoe jerks and wanders. If both fall into rhythm, the hull seems suddenly lighter. Stroke, stroke, stroke. The sound becomes almost hypnotic. A faint splash, a wooden creak, a breath, a pause, then another splash. Water travel begins acquiring cadence. You can cover distance without constant improvisation. That changes what feels reachable. A far bank is no longer merely visible. It becomes a destination. A fishing place farther down the coast becomes part of an ordinary journey. A narrow channel between islands no longer requires waiting for the current to do the work. You can aim. That ability is far more important than speed. Control creates reliability, and reliability changes human behavior. If you know you can return to the same place, you're more likely to travel there regularly. If you can steer toward a particular landing, you can carry cargo without leaving the final destination entirely to chance. If you can turn against a current, you can avoid rocks, branches, reeds, and shallow sandbars. A boat that merely floats is useful. A boat that obeys is transformative. Although obeys may be a generous word, the river still has its own plans. You approach a bend where the current runs faster. The bow starts drifting outward. You paddle harder on one side. The boat turns back toward the inside of the curve. Now steering becomes deliberate rather than accidental. You discover that a paddle can guide as well as propel. Hold the blade in the water near the stern and it acts almost like a rudder. Sweep it outward in a broad arc and the bow rotates. Pull sharply on one side and the whole craft changes direction. You begin learning several distinct movements without naming them formally. Forward strokes, backward strokes, sweeps, bracing strokes, steering holds. Every motion produces different reaction. The paddle becomes an extension of the body. You feel current through it. When the blade enters fast water, pressure increases. In an eddy, resistance changes. In shallow water, the paddle may strike mud. In weeds, it catches. Your hands become sensors. A curious footnote is that many experienced paddlers can identify changes in current almost entirely through touch, feeling tiny shifts in resistance through the shaft before their eyes fully register what the water is doing. That kind of sensitivity does not arrive instantly. It develops through repetition. You spend hours on the water. Your palms toughen. The shaft leaves polished areas where your hands grip most often. You begin recognizing how different blade shapes behave. A wide blade gives strong power but requires effort. A narrower blade may suit longer journeys. A longer shaft helps from a higher position. A shorter one can be easier to control in a low canoe. This is design refined by use. Nobody needs a written manual. The boat itself provides feedback. If the paddle feels clumsy, you reshape it. If the blade breaks, you choose better grain next time. If the shaft is too thick, your hands tire. If it is too thin, it may flex or snap. You carve carefully. Stone tools leave shallow marks along the wood. You smooth rough edges with abrasion. Perhaps you harden parts near heat. Perhaps you decorate the grip or blade with lines that identify ownership, family, or tradition. A tool used constantly becomes personal. You know the weight of your own paddle. You know how it balances in the hand. Someone else's may feel subtly wrong even if it looks almost identical. This kind of familiarity matters on long journeys. The paddle is no longer merely equipment. It is part of practiced movement. You can imagine a young learner being handed a smaller version. At first, the child splashes more people than water. There is laughter. The paddle goes in backward. The boat turns unexpectedly. Someone receives a wet shoulder. Instruction happens through correction, imitation, and occasional embarrassment. Skills become social knowledge. You learn by watching older paddlers. They tell you where to place the blade. They show you how to sit. They warn you not to fight the current directly. They teach you when to paddle and when to let the water help. A council decree from much later ancient societies would never be required to prove the importance of such knowledge. The repeated presence of paddles, boats, fishing traditions, and waterborne transport across ancient communities makes the practical value obvious. Movement on water becomes a learned craft. And once enough people master it, group travel becomes more organized. Several canoes can move together. The led craft chooses a route. Others follow. Paddlers maintain spacing. People communicate with calls, gestures, or the position of boats. Cargo vessels may travel more slowly. Fishing craft may separate near productive water. Travel acquires structure. You can now coordinate a crossing instead of merely surviving one. On calm lakes, paddling can be almost effortless. The surface reflects sky so clearly that the boat seems suspended between two worlds. Your blade breaks that reflection. A dark oval appears, ripples spread outward, the hull glides silently. On a river, the experience is different. Current adds constant movement. You learn to angle the bow rather than point directly at the destination. If the water pushes left, you begin slightly upstream. The river carries you sideways while you paddle forward. You arrive where you intended. This requires prediction. You're no longer reacting only to the present position. You imagine where the current will place you several moments from now. That is navigation on a small scale. It is also mathematics performed through experience, distance, speed, angle, current, effort. None of these need numbers to exist. Your body calculates them. Scholars bicker over exactly when specialized paddling techniques became standardized in different regions, because movements leave no archaeological trace and wooden tools are rarely preserved. A paddle can survive occasionally. The hundreds of skilled gestures performed with it vanish the moment the paddler stops moving. This is one of the great silences of prehistory. Objects remain. Technique disappears. An archaeologist may find a carved wooden blade and know that it was used. But how did the person hold it? How fast did they paddle? Did they kneel, sit, stand? Did one person steer while others provided power? Were particular strokes taught to children? Were songs used to synchronize larger crews? Most of that lives beyond recovery. Yet you can infer how quickly humans would have discovered efficiency. Long travel punishes poor technique. A bad grip causes blisters. An awkward stroke wastes strength. Uneven timing makes a boat wander. Practical necessity becomes an excellent teacher. You also discover the paddle's defensive usefulness. A submerged branch appears suddenly. You push the blade hard against the water. The canoe tilts but avoids the obstacle. That emergency push is a brace. It keeps you upright. Balance and steering begin blending together. On choppy water, this becomes critical. A wave strikes from the side. Your instinct is to lean away. That can make things worse. Instead, you learn to place the paddle flat against the surface for support. The water pushes back. The craft steadies. There is something strange about using water to protect yourself from water, but it works. Oddly enough, paddles can serve purposes completely unrelated to propulsion. They can push boats away from docks or banks. They can measure shallow depth. They can support nets. They can help recover floating objects. They can become temporary walking sticks on muddy ground. And inevitably, someone will use one to poke something that should probably have been left alone. Humans rarely permit a useful stick to remain dedicated to one job. The steering possibilities grow more sophisticated. A paddler at the stern can control direction while others focus on forward motion. In larger craft, a dedicated steering paddle may become longer and heavier. Now roles begin to specialize. Not everyone needs to perform exactly the same task. One person watches the route, others provide power. Someone manages cargo. Someone bails water. Someone keeps children from enthusiastically testing the boat's stability. A vessel becomes a small cooperative system. You feel the difference when the crew works well. The strokes enter nearly together. The hull surges. No energy is wasted correcting unnecessary turns. Conversation becomes quieter because everyone knows the rhythm. The sound of paddles fills the gaps. Dip, pull, lift, dip, pull, lift. Your breathing falls into time with the motion. There is effort, but it becomes steady rather than exhausting. control over water begins to feel ordinary. That may be the most remarkable development of all. A technological revolution eventually becomes routine. The first time a paddle turns a boat deliberately, the effect is extraordinary. Generations later, a child may grow up assuming that this is simply how people move. The skill becomes embedded in daily life. You paddle to fishing grounds, you visit another settlement, you gather plants, you move supplies, you cross a lake, you return at dusk. The tool that once solves a problem becomes part of the landscape itself. You reach a narrow landing as evening settles over the water. Instead of drifting past it, you slow your strokes. One backward pull reduces speed. A short sweep turns the bow. You extend the paddle toward the bank and press gently against the mud. The hull slides alongside the reeds exactly where you intended. No crash, no scramble, no heroic rescue from downstream, just arrival. You lift the paddle from the water. Droplets fall from the blade in a quiet line. Your hands remain wrapped around the polished shaft for a moment. The object is simple enough to overlook. A piece of shaped wood. Nothing more, yet with it, you can choose direction where there is no path. You can accelerate where the current is weak, turn where the channel bends, stop where the shore invites you. Cross water that has no bottom within reach. The boat gives you buoyancy. The paddle gives you intention, and on a surface that never stops moving, intention is the closest thing to a road. You no longer learn boat building by accident, you learn it from people. The difference is enormous. A skilled builder stands beside you with a length of timber laid across low supports. The wood smells fresh where the bark has been removed. Chips cover the ground. Cordage hangs from a branch nearby, and several tools rest within easy reach. You're not told to invent anything. You're told to watch. The builder runs a hand along the grain. You copy the gesture. The fingers pause over a knot. You notice that too. A tool is lifted. You watch the angle of the strike. Then the handle is passed to you. This is how complicated knowledge survives without books. One person shows another. You imitate. You make mistakes. Someone corrects them before those mistakes become expensive. That last part matters greatly when the object under construction is supposed to keep several people from sinking. Boat building becomes less a collection of clever ideas and more a tradition. You begin learning rules that may never be spoken as rules. Choose straight grain where strength matters. Do not cut too deeply near a weak point. Keep the sides balanced. Check the bindings when they dry. Do not trust a crack simply because it looked small yesterday. These lessons live inside habit. The builder may not explain why every action matters. Sometimes the answer is simply that this is how it has always been done. That phrase can sound stubborn in a modern workshop. In a prehistoric one, it may mean several generations have already discovered which shortcuts lead to swimming. You kneel beside a nearly finished hull. Your palm moves along the inside. One side feels thicker. The builder notices your hesitation and taps the area. You scrape more wood away. There are no numerical measurements. No ruler lies across the gunwale. Yet the craft must remain balanced. So measurement comes through comparison. Finger widths, hand spans, lengths of cord, the distance between knots, the reach of an arm. Repeated objects can also become informal standards. A paddle shaft may be compared with the height of its user. A frame rib may be bent against an older rib. A new boat can be judged against a vessel everyone already trusts. This is practical standardization long before anybody writes a specification. Records confirm that ancient boat building eventually became highly specialized in many societies, with particular communities, families, or skilled craftspeople preserving detailed knowledge about timber selection, shaping, fastening, waterproofing, and launching. That specialization does not appear all at once. It grows because experience has value. If one person consistently builds craft that remains stable, resist leaks, and survive rough water, people pay attention. If another builds vessels that develop fascinating new openings halfway across a lake, people also pay attention, but for slightly different reasons. Reputation becomes part of technology. A good builder does not simply shape materials. A good builder carries memory. You watch older workers inspect trees before cutting. They do not choose the largest automatically. A huge trunk with twisted grain may be worse than a smaller straight one. Wood grown under uneven stress can split unpredictably. Damage from insects matters. Rot matters. The shape of the trunk matters. Season may matter too. Some wood is easier to work when fresh. Some needs controlled drying. If timber dries too quickly, cracks can open. If it remains damp for too long, decay may begin. You learn that construction starts in the forest, not at the water. Knowledge reaches backward into material selection. It also reaches forward into maintenance. A boat pulled onto shore after use is examined. Someone turns it slightly. Another checks the underside. A scraping mark from gravel appears near the bow. A patch is planned. Bindings are touched and tested. Water trapped inside is removed. The craft may be raised from damp ground so air can circulate around it. You begin to understand that boats age like almost everything else humans build. Sun dries them. Water swells them. Heat changes them. Cold changes them. Salt can be brutal. Fresh water brings its own problems. Insects arrive whenever a wooden object looks particularly useful. A vessel that lasts requires care. So maintenance becomes part of inherited knowledge. Children see adults repair cracks. Young people carry resin, fibre, bark, or tools. Someone learns how to heat sealant without ruining it. Someone else knows which plant fibres remain strong when wet. No single person needs to know everything. The community itself becomes a storehouse. This is perhaps more important than any individual invention. A brilliant idea can disappear when one person dies. Shared knowledge survives. You hear instructions repeated while people work. Hold that tighter. Wet the fibre first. Keep the flame away from the edge. Do not twist the frame there. Push from the other side. Watch the grain. The words are simple. The knowledge behind them may be ancient. Sometimes instruction arrives through stories. A dangerous crossing is remembered. A badly repaired hull becomes the centre of a cautionary tale. A builder who chose poor timber may be laughed about long after the boat itself has vanished. Stories make technical information memorable, because nobody enjoys listening to a list of maintenance instructions beside a fire. A disastrous uncle, however, can remain educational for generations. A curious footnote is that specialized craft traditions in many societies often include taboos, rituals, songs, or ceremonial practices surrounding construction and launching. These may appear purely symbolic, yet they can also structure work, reinforce memory, assign responsibility, or encourage careful treatment of important materials. Perhaps certain trees are not cut casually. Perhaps a vessel receives a name. Perhaps construction begins on a particular day. Perhaps builders sing while coordinating repetitive labour. Ritual and technique do not need to compete. A song can synchronize bodies while also carrying meaning. You feel this when several people pull a heavy hull. One voice calls. Others respond. Everyone heaves together. The boat moves. Without coordination, the same group wastes effort. Shared rhythm becomes a tool. The same is true during construction. One person holds, one cuts, one braces, one watches the fire. Roles shift depending on skill and strength. Boat building becomes a social event because large objects create large tasks. You also begin learning about mistakes through demonstration. A builder brings you to an old, cracked hull lying near the edge of camp. The damage runs along the grain. You touch it. The split begins near a knot. The lesson is immediate. Bad material selection has consequences. Another vessel sits twisted because it dried unevenly. Another has patched areas where stones wore through the bottom. These old craft become textbooks made of failure. You study them. You understand what not to repeat. Scholars bicker over how formal boat-building apprenticeships were in prehistoric communities, because teaching methods leave almost no direct evidence. Knowledge may have passed within families, through age groups, through specialized craft lineages, or simply by constant participation in everyday work. Probably the answer changes from place to place. A small fishing community may teach almost everyone basic repair. A settlement using large cargo craft may depend on a smaller group of specialists. A family known for excellent workmanship may guard certain techniques. Or perhaps knowledge is shared freely because everybody's survival depends on reliable boats. You cannot easily recover the social rules, but you can feel why teaching becomes necessary. Complexity grows. A simple floating bundle can be understood quickly. A sophisticated hull cannot. The builder must control thickness, shape, balance, fastening, waterproofing, weight, flexibility, repairability. Different parts of the vessel face different stresses. The bow meets waves and obstacles. The bottom scrapes. The sides flex. The stern may carry a steering paddler. Bindings near major joints work constantly. You begin recognizing these zones by wear. A boat tells you where it suffers. You simply need to listen. The phrase sounds poetic until you spend enough time maintaining one. Then it becomes literal. Creaks matter. Changes in movement matter. A new vibration can signal loosened fastening. Water entering where none entered yesterday matters. The hull communicates through small annoyances. Experienced users notice them early. You take a boat onto calm water for testing. This is not travel. It is inspection. One person sits near the center while another watches from shore. You shift weight deliberately. The hull tilts. You note how quickly it recovers. You paddle in a circle. The craft pulls slightly to one side. That may mean uneven shaping or simply uneven loading. You rearrange cargo. Try again. Better. Practical testing becomes part of construction. A vessel is not truly finished when the tools stop. It is finished when the water agrees, and the water is an unforgiving inspector. You also discover that builders can tune boats for purpose. A fishing craft benefits from stability. A vessel meant for longer travel may favour speed and efficient movement. A cargo boat needs capacity. A marsh craft may need to turn tightly among reeds. A coastal vessel must handle waves. Once people understand these differences, there is no reason every boat should look the same. Design becomes specialised. You can identify what a craft is meant to do by its proportions. A broad hull feels steady. A narrow one moves quickly. Raised ends handle chop differently from flat ones. A shallow draft allows passage over thin water. A deeper hull can offer more carrying space. These choices are compromises. More stability can mean more drag. More capacity can mean more weight. Lighter construction can reduce durability. Every improvement creates another question. That is why skilled builders remain valuable. They know where compromise becomes danger. One scandalous aside is that craft knowledge can also become a source of status. If your boat is straighter, faster, better balanced, or simply less inclined to leak than everyone else's, people notice. Human beings have probably been admiring other people's equipment and pretending not to care for a very long time. A beautifully finished paddle may attract attention. A carefully decorated bow may identify a household. Distinctive binding patterns may reveal who built the vessel. Technology starts carrying identity. You no longer see the boat as only a tool. It can belong to a family, a work group, a community, a place. Its construction style tells a story about where you come from. That matters when people travel and meet others. Different shoreline communities may recognize one another's craft from a distance. Hull shapes differ. Materials differ. Decoration differs. The boat becomes part of culture. Techniques may spread through contact. A visitor notices a better fastening method. A marriage connects two communities and carries knowledge between them. A captured or traded object reveals unfamiliar craftsmanship. Travel itself encourages technological exchange. You see another vessel moving faster than yours. Naturally, you become curious. Perhaps their paddles are shaped differently. Perhaps their hull is narrower. Perhaps their bindings use a knot you have never seen. Human beings do not need formal conferences to exchange engineering ideas. Sometimes envy is sufficient. You examine, copy, adapt. The new method enters local practice. But not every foreign idea is useful. A design suited to calm lakes may behave badly on open coast. A bark hull ideal in one forest may be impossible where suitable trees do not grow. Shared knowledge therefore includes knowing what not to copy. Tradition adapts outside ideas to local conditions. You learn to ask whether a technique belongs to this water, this wind, this timber, this journey. The workshop grows quiet toward evening. Tools are gathered. Wood chips remain scattered beneath your knees. The unfinished boat rests on supports, its shape already recognizable. Tomorrow, more scraping will come, more binding, more checking. Perhaps a repair to something nobody expected to damage, but nobody begins from ignorance. Hands around, you know what to do. Those hands learned from other hands, and those people learned from people whose names may already be fading from memory. That is how a technology becomes durable. Not because one brilliant object survives forever. Objects decay. Wood splits. Fibre rots. Hides tear. Boats eventually return to earth and water. What lasts is the method. You watch the builder place a hand against the hull one final time. The gesture looks almost affectionate. Perhaps it is only inspection. Perhaps those two things are not so different when enough work has gone into something. The knowledge remains in touch, timing, judgment, rhythm, and repetition. It moves from one person to another without ever becoming visible. And through that quiet chain of teaching, a boat can disappear while boat building survives. The first thing you notice is not the boat. It is the empty space beside the village. A patch of shoreline has been cleared. Wooden stakes stand near the water. Baskets wait under a shelter. Nets hang from poles to dry. Several people arrive carrying fish, shells, bundles of reeds, and stone tools that clearly did not all come from the same place. Water travel has stopped being an occasional trick. It has become part of the economy of life. You wake before sunrise because the best fishing ground lies beyond the shallows. The air is cool. Damp sand presses beneath your feet. Nets smell of river water, old fibre, and yesterday's catch. You load the boat carefully, placing baskets where they will not shift. Several paddlers climb aboard. The vessel leaves shore while most of the settlement is still dim. This changes the day's possibilities immediately. You're no longer limited to food gathered within walking distance. Deep channels can be reached. Offshore rocks become accessible. Small islands can be searched for birds, eggs, shellfish, and plants. Fishing grounds that once demanded dangerous swimming can now be visited routinely. A boat expands the usable landscape without moving the village. That may sound simple, but it has enormous consequences. More food can support more people. A reliable source of fish can reduce dependence on unpredictable hunting. Seasonal runs of particular species can be exploited more efficiently. Large catches can be carried back instead of consumed near the water. And when food becomes transportable, it can also become exchangeable. You return with more fish than your household needs. Someone else has stone. Another family has hides. A neighbouring settlement produces unusually strong cordage. Now the boat does more than bring food home. It carries surplus outward. Trade becomes easier when heavy goods can float. On land, every object must be carried by a person, dragged, or loaded onto an animal in societies that possess suitable domestic animals. On water, a vessel bears much of the burden. Stone is particularly revealing. High-quality toolstone does not occur everywhere. Obsidian, flint, chert, and other useful materials can travel surprisingly long distances from their geological sources. Records confirm that ancient exchange networks moved valued stone, shells, pigments, ornaments, and other goods across substantial regions, sometimes linking communities separated by rivers, coastlines, and sea channels. Boats make many such connections faster and cheaper. You load several heavy stone blanks into the bottom of the craft. They would be unpleasant to carry across rough country. On water, they simply sit there. The paddlers provide effort, certainly, but the cargo does not need its own pair of exhausted legs. You begin to understand why river systems later become natural trade routes. Water joins places. A settlement upstream has timber. A community downstream has salt. Another has excellent fishing. Another sits near valuable stone. A boat allows these differences to become useful rather than frustrating. Goods begin moving regularly. So do people. A visitor arrives from far downriver. Their speech sounds familiar but not identical. Their clothing is cut differently. Their baskets use another weaving pattern. They carry shells you have never seen on your own shore. Immediately, your world becomes larger. Contact changes culture quietly. A knot is copied. A story is retold. A new fishing technique is observed. A decorative pattern appears on local tools. Words pass between languages. Marriage connects families who once lived beyond easy walking distance. Boat travel turns distant strangers into occasional visitors, then trading partners, relatives, rivals, or all four at once. Human relationships become stretched along waterways. You begin measuring distance differently. A place that takes 2 days to reach over difficult ground may be only several hours away by river. Another settlement that once seemed remote becomes familiar. Children grow up knowing people who live beyond the horizon of the local path network. News travels. So do rumours. This is a less celebrated contribution of boats, but surely an important one. Human beings invent faster transportation and almost immediately use it to improve the speed of gossip. A scandalous aside, perhaps, but a believable one. Who married whom? Who traded badly? Who saw an unfamiliar vessel near the eastern inlet? Who caught an absurdly large fish and has become impossible to speak with? Information is cargo too. The ability to move people also changes migration. A community under pressure from drought, conflict, depleted resources, or population growth can search farther afield. Families can carry children, tools, food stores, and useful materials across waterways that once blocked relocation. Migration becomes less dependent on continuous land routes. River valleys guide movement. Coasts provide chains of possible stopping places. Islands become stepping stones. You can travel with possessions rather than abandoning nearly everything. This matters because migration is rarely just people moving. It is culture moving. You bring fire-making methods, food preparation, tool styles, songs, stories, beliefs, ways of building shelters, knowledge of plants, knowledge of stars, words for family relationships. A new settlement may be physically distant while remaining culturally tied to its place of origin. Water connects memory. You stand on a new shore unpacking familiar objects. The landscape feels strange, but your routines do not. You still shape tools in known ways. You still tie familiar knots. You still prepare food according to methods learned from older relatives. The boat has moved more than bodies. It has carried a social world. No agreement has been reached on whether many prehistoric maritime expansions were driven primarily by population pressure, opportunity, environmental change, curiosity, trade, conflict, or combinations of these forces. The motives rarely survive directly. Archaeologists can sometimes reconstruct where people moved. Understanding why is much harder. Perhaps nobody has one grand reason. One family follows relatives, another seeks better fishing, another avoids conflict, another simply sees an opportunity. Large patterns can emerge from many small decisions. Water travel also changes how communities organize labor. A substantial fishing expedition may require several people. One handles the vessel, another manages nets, another watches shallow water. Someone processes the catch on return. Someone repairs damaged gear. Boat technology creates associated work. Nets need fiber. Paddles need carving. Hull coatings need preparation. Landing areas need maintenance. Fish may need drying, smoking, or salting in societies with suitable methods and resources. An entire web of tasks grows around the vessel. This creates specialization. Some people become better fishers, some become expert navigators, some build, some repair, some trade. Skill begins shaping status. A person who can guide a loaded craft through difficult water possesses knowledge other people depend on. A successful trader knows not just where to go, but whom to trust. A boat builder's reputation may reach settlements they rarely visit. Technology starts rearranging social influence. You can feel this during a trading journey. Your craft arrives at another settlement carrying stone, hides, dried food, or ornaments. People gather near the landing. Goods are examined. Hands test weight and texture. Offers are made. Nobody uses coins. Value is negotiated through need, rarity, quality, custom, and relationships. A beautiful shell may be worth far more inland than it is beside the coast. A certain stone may be ordinary near its source and precious several days away. Transport creates differences in value. That encourages longer routes, and longer routes encourage more reliable boats. Society and technology begin pushing one another forward. Better vessels permit more exchange. More exchange creates demand for better vessels. The waterway grows busy, perhaps not crowded in the modern sense, but familiar enough that a passing craft is no longer astonishing. You recognize hull shapes. You recognize crews. Certain visitors arrive seasonally. Others appear during festivals, marriages, or periods of abundant fishing. The river becomes social space, but connection does not guarantee peace. The same boat that carries fish can carry fighters. The same route that brings trading partners can bring raiders. A village accessible by water gains opportunities and vulnerabilities together. You begin watching unfamiliar vessels more carefully. Who is aboard? How many are they carrying trade goods? Are weapons visible? Do they approach openly? Do they land where visitors usually land? Waterways can become contested. Control of a narrow channel, harbour, fishing ground, or river crossing may offer significant advantages. A community positioned at an important junction can influence movement. Perhaps travellers offer gifts for access. Perhaps alliances form between settlements. Perhaps disputes erupt over fishing areas. The boat introduces mobility into conflict. A group can arrive quickly and leave before opponents respond. Weapons and supplies can be transported farther. People can attack from directions that land defences do not cover. This is hardly the peaceful image of a quiet canoe beneath moonlight. Human beings remain complicated. Useful technology serves whatever intentions people bring to it. Yet warfare is only one part of the story. Boats also allow alliances to stretch farther. Relatives can reinforce one another. Messages can travel rapidly. Ceremonial gatherings can draw participants from distant shores. Shared festivals may link communities across islands or rivers. A boat can carry a war party one month and wedding guests the next. History rarely provides technologies with tidy moral assignments. A curious footnote is that ceremonial exchange in some later seafaring societies involves goods that travel enormous distances while possessing little obvious practical value. Shell valuables, ornaments, prestige objects. And gifts may circulate because relationships themselves matter. The object is important partly because of where it has been and who has handled it. You begin to see that boats do not only move necessities, they move meaning. An exotic shell worn around someone's neck says something. Perhaps it shows connection to distant people, perhaps status, perhaps participation in a trading partnership, perhaps family ties. Objects acquire stories because travel gives them histories. Language changes too. Boat terms become specialized. Different currents receive names. Landing places receive names. Winds receive names. Parts of vessels acquire vocabulary. Routes become embedded in oral tradition. A child grows up hearing places mentioned long before visiting them. The wider geography becomes imaginable through speech. This changes identity. You may belong to one settlement, but you also belong to a river system, coast, lake region, or islet network. Your world has shape beyond the horizon. Routes connect sacred places, burial grounds, trading partners, relatives, seasonal camps, fishing grounds. Stories attach themselves to cliffs, channels, and islands. Water is no longer empty, it becomes mapped through memory. You know that a certain bend marks halfway to another village. A rock warns of shallow water. A group of trees identifies a landing. A particular current must be crossed at an angle. Social geography rests on physical geography. Your boat carries both. You paddle into a settlement at dusk. Smoke rises from fires. Someone recognizes your craft before you reach shore. Children run toward the landing. Adults stand to help unload. You have brought food, perhaps, or stone, or news. Maybe you bring a relative who has not visited in years. Maybe you bring a stranger who will become family. Maybe the most valuable thing aboard is a story about conditions farther upriver. Whatever the cargo, arrival creates connection. The vessel rests against the bank while people gather around it. Its hull is scratched. Bindings have been repaired. The paddle blades are worn smooth. Nothing about it looks revolutionary. Yet around this simple craft grows a wider human world. Fishing grounds expand. Goods circulate. Families migrate. Ideas move. Alliances stretch. Conflicts travel. Languages mingle. Communities begin seeing distant shores not as separate worlds, but as places connected by routes that can be remembered and repeated. A boat changes more than movement. It changes who can meet whom, who can trade with whom can marry who can help who can threaten whom. And gradually, the water between settlements stops feeling like empty distance. It becomes part of society itself. The boat beneath you no longer looks accidental. Its shape is deliberate. The bow narrows cleanly. The sides rise with purpose. Paddles rest within reach. Cordage has been twisted carefully rather than grabbed in desperation from the nearest vine. Every part seems to carry the memory of countless decisions made by people who discovered what water rewards and what it punishes. You push away from shore. The vessel responds immediately. For perhaps thousands of generations, humans have been doing something very similar, improving one solution at a time until watercraft become among the most sophisticated technologies of the ancient world. The transformation is easy to underestimate. A floating branch requires observation. A raft requires assembly. A dugout requires woodworking. A framed boat requires design. A seagoing vessel requires all of these things plus navigation, teamwork, maintenance, planning, and accumulated knowledge. That is the deeper story of how humans invent boats. They do not invent one object. They invent a system. You can see that system clearly once voyages become longer. A coastal trip that lasts several hours requires little more than a reliable craft and favourable conditions. A journey lasting days introduces new problems. You need drinking water, food, shelter from sun, spray, repairs, space for cargo, enough stability to survive changing weather, a way to navigate when familiar landmarks disappear. Every added mile forces technology to mature. The boat grows because the journey grows. In several ancient parts of the world, builders eventually begin joining separate wooden planks rather than relying on a single hollowed trunk. This is an extraordinary step. A tree once limits the width and length of your hull. Plank construction begins loosening that restriction. You can assemble a vessel from many pieces. The challenge, naturally, is persuading all those pieces to remain attached while surrounded by water. You shape edges carefully. Planks can be stitched with fibre, fastened with wooden joints, or secured using techniques suited to local woodworking traditions. Gaps must be sealed. Plant fibre, resin, pitch, or other caulking materials can help prevent leaks. You run your fingers along a seam. This line is now as important as any single piece of timber. If it opens, water enters. So shipbuilding becomes increasingly concerned with joints. The strength of the vessel depends not merely on the wood, but on the connections between pieces. Records confirm that ancient Egyptian boat builders were constructing substantial plank-built vessels thousands of years before the modern era, using sophisticated woodworking techniques to create rivercraft and larger ships. The Egyptians possess an obvious reason to care about boats. The Nile is not merely a river running beside civilization. It is one of civilization's main roads. Settlements stretch along its banks. Agriculture depends on its waters. Heavy materials can be transported along it. People, grain, animals, stone, officials, soldiers, and religious processions all travel by boat. A large vessel now becomes infrastructure. You're far from the age when floating means clinging to convenient timber. A cargo boat may carry weights that would require enormous effort over land. Stone blocks can be moved. Grain can travel from productive regions. Construction materials can reach cities. The scale of water transport becomes astonishing. Yet even these impressive craft remain connected to basic principles that never change. Stay buoyant. Remain stable. Keep water mostly outside. Control direction. Avoid breaking apart. Boat building grows more elaborate, but water retains a wonderfully simple grading system. Either the vessel works, or everybody learns something quickly elsewhere. Other traditions develop along different paths. In Mesopotamia, rivers encourage boats adapted to the Tigris and Euphrates. Reedcraft continue to exist alongside wooden vessels. Round boats can carry cargo through river systems. Along the Mediterranean, maritime communities gradually build vessels designed for the coastal trade and open water travel. Around the Indian Ocean, sailors learn seasonal wind patterns. Across the Pacific, entirely different traditions produce remarkable ocean-going craft. There is no single ladder from primitive boat to advanced ship. There are many ladders, some run through dugouts, some through reed construction, some through stitched planks, some through outriggers, some through twin hulls. People solve similar physical problems with culturally distinct answers. One particularly clever development is the outrigger. Imagine a narrow canoe that moves quickly but rolls too easily. You could simply make the hull wider. That creates stability. But wider hulls may become heavier and slower. Another possibility is to attach a smaller float beside the main hull using projecting supports. Now the extra float resists tipping. The main hull can remain narrow. This is the sort of solution that makes engineering feel almost mischievous. Instead of eliminating instability, you give instability something else to argue with. Outrigger traditions become especially important in parts of island Southeast Asia and the Pacific. Twin-hulled vessels offer another approach. Two long hulls connected by crossbeams provide a broad, stable platform. Larger loads can be carried. People can travel farther. Sails can be used effectively. Entire ocean worlds become connected through craft, built without modern metal shipyards. A curious footnote is that some of the most accomplished ancient and traditional ocean navigators travel through landscapes that outsiders once described as remote. From the navigator's perspective, the islands are not isolated at all. They are linked by known sea roads. That reversal matters. A map drawn by someone on land may see vast emptiness between islands. A sailor sees routes, currents, winds, star paths, seasonal patterns, bird movements, known stopping places. The ocean becomes readable. Once sails enter the picture, another transformation occurs. Human muscle is no longer the only source of propulsion. Wind can work for you. At first, this sounds wonderfully convenient. Simply raise cloth or woven material and allow nature to provide free transportation. The wind, unfortunately, has never agreed to behave like a reliable employee. It comes from inconvenient directions. It weakens. It strengthens. It shifts. So sailing demands yet another body of knowledge. You learn how the position of the sail changes movement. You learn how hull shape affects steering. You learn that a vessel can sometimes travel at angles to the wind rather than simply being pushed directly downwind. Rigging adds ropes, supports, and specialized tasks. Masts introduce new stresses into the hull. The boat becomes a machine made of interacting systems. Now larger crews require coordination. One person steers. Others handle sail. Others manage cargo. Someone watches weather. Someone monitors water entering the hull. Someone prepares food. Someone complains about the food. Maintaining one of humanity's most durable maritime traditions. Long voyages create small societies afloat. Rules matter. Timing matters. Trust matters. A mistake by one person can affect everyone. Boat technology therefore helps encourage forms of organization that go beyond craftsmanship. Navigation knowledge may become specialized. Experienced sailors gain authority. Certain routes become associated with particular seasons. Ports emerge where travelers gather. Trade networks stretch farther. Entire cultures orient themselves toward the sea. Historians still argue whether major advances in ancient seafaring usually spread through direct contact between neighboring peoples or emerged independently because similar challenges naturally produce similar solutions. Arguments split along particular technologies. A sail design may spread from one region to another. A hull form may arise separately. A fastening technique may be borrowed and adapted. Human beings copy useful ideas enthusiastically, but they also reinvent obvious ones. The result is a maritime world filled with both connections and independent creativity. You can see this clearly in the simplest features. Most boats need some means of propulsion. Most need stability. Most need a shape suited to their water. But the specific solutions vary enormously. A Neil cargo boat does not need to behave like a Pacific voyaging canoe. A marsh vessel does not need to survive ocean swell. A fishing boat serving a small lake does not need space for weeks of provisions. There is no perfect boat. There is only a boat suited to a purpose. That may be the most enduring lesson of the entire technology. Design follows need. Need follows landscape. Landscape shapes culture, and culture reshapes design. You stand beside a large, ancient vessel under construction. The sound is different from the quiet scraping of a single trunk. Many people are working. Wooden pieces are lifted into position. Fibers are tightened. Seams are inspected. Tools strike in overlapping rhythms. The air smells of timber, smoke, resin, sweat, and nearby water. This is no longer an experiment undertaken by one curious person at a riverbank. It is an industry. Materials must arrive from somewhere. Timber may travel considerable distances. Rope must be produced. Sails require large amounts of fibre and labour. Food must support workers. Specialists must be trained. A ship can represent the work of an entire community. That makes a boat economically powerful. A ruler who controls ships can move goods. A merchant can reach markets. A fishing community can harvest offshore waters. Migrants can settle distant places. Armies can cross waterways. Religious travelers can visit sacred sites. Diplomats can carry messages. The boat becomes woven into almost every large-scale human activity near navigable water, and yet advanced ships do not erase simpler craft. This is important. A fisherman does not need a massive sailing vessel to cross a narrow river. A reed boat can remain useful beside far more elaborate ships. Dugout canoes survive because they work. Rafts survive because they are cheap and practical. Technological history is not a parade in which every old invention disappears when a new one arrives. Useful designs endure, sometimes for thousands of years. Oddly enough, even in societies capable of building enormous ships, people continue constructing some of the simplest floating craft imaginable for local work. Complexity is expensive. Simplicity has advantages. You do not build a palace when you need a shed. You do not build an ocean-going ship when you need to check a fishing trap 50 paces from shore. This coexistence helps us explain why the story of boats never becomes a straight line. It branches constantly. Some vessels grow enormous, others stay small, some gain sails, others keep paddles, some are built for cargo, others for speed, some cross oceans, others never leave a familiar inlet. Every design answers a particular conversation between human needs and water. You step aboard once more. This craft is larger than anything a lone builder could easily make. Wooden seams run beneath your hand. A mast rises overhead, cordage stretches upward in careful lines. The deck moves gently as small waves reach the hull. You look toward open water. The horizon seems distant, but it no longer seems unreachable. That is perhaps the greatest change boats produce in the human imagination. They alter the meaning of far away. A distant shore becomes somewhere people might live. An island becomes somewhere people might visit. A river becomes a route. A sea becomes a network. An ocean becomes something that can be learned. There is no single moment when humanity invents the boat, no single beach, no single inventor, no morning when everyone agrees that the problem has finally been solved. There are only countless experiments scattered through deep time, a branch that supports weight, a bundle tied more tightly, a trunk hollowed more carefully, a hide stretched across a stronger frame, a paddle shaped more broadly, a seam sealed more effectively, a voyage remembered accurately, a child taught how to build what older hands already understand. Each small improvement pushes the human world a little farther onto the water, and eventually those improvements carry people beyond visible land. You feel the hull rise beneath your feet. Wind fills the sail with a deep, soft snap. The shoreline begins shrinking. Ahead lies open water, not empty water. A route. The vessel moves forward, carrying wood, fibre, knowledge, memory, and the accumulated patience of generations. Humanity has not conquered the water. The water remains stronger. Storms still come, currents still pull. Waves still remind sailors that confidence and foolishness can become very close relatives. But people have learned something more useful than conquest. They have learned cooperation with materials, with wind, with current, with one another. That is how floating becomes travel, how travel becomes migration, how migration becomes connection. How simple experiments at the water's edge become ships capable of crossing seas. And as the vessel moves steadily into the evening light, you can almost feel the entire history resting beneath your feet. Not one invention, thousands of choices, thousands of hands, one ancient desire, to find out what lies across the water. The wind softens now, and the sail loosens into a quieter shape above you. The water no longer feels like something to solve. It simply rises and falls beneath the hull, patient, dark, and calm. You let the shoreline blur into evening. The wooden deck is warm from the fading day. Rope shifts gently against timber, somewhere nearby. A small wave folds against the side and disappears. You do not need to steer anywhere now. No distant island waits for you. No current needs studying. No tool needs improving. The long work of human hands can rest. The builders are quiet. The paddles lie still. Even the wind seems content to carry the vessel without asking for anything in return. Your breathing slows with the motion. Up, down, a little forward, then stillness again. The horizon fades, stars remain above the water, and the boat keeps floating, softly, safely, through the dark.